welcome to Talking Youth Work. My name is Anita Silva, and together with Rui Branco, we interview experts and practitioners that have a say when it comes to innovation in youth work. This current series is funded by the project Inception of Learning, that is funded by the European Commission through the Erasmus Plus Youth Key Action 2 projects. This project aims to support youth workers, trainers, and educators in delivering quality learning experiences in the field of youth in the context of Generation Z and Generation Alpha. This episode is one of those that gently messes up with our certainties, and I say this in the best way possible. We were joined by Dr. Barbara Oakley. She's a professor at university. She's a researcher, an all-round adventurous woman. Her open online courses are some of the most popular on the internet about learning. And she was talking to us about how learning actually happens in the brain, especially in these new generations that are exposed to distractions, social media, etc. So we dove into a slightly uncomfortable question, especially for me, also as a person who has a lot of love for non-formal learning, which is, are the learning approaches that we cherish really helping us to learn more or learn better? What I mean is, yes, the games, the exercises, everything we use, all that diversity of methods, they can be engaging and social and beautifully designed. But are our learners retaining that information or forgetting about it afterwards? Are they practicing the skills they need to be practicing? Are they really deepening the attitudes that we want to promote? So this conversation is really about the methods of teaching that support learning in the brain and questioning these new ways of learning and teaching and education and educating. So it's a lot of food for thought, plenty of moments that made me also pause to rethink my own practices. But all in all, I think it is a generous sharing from Dr. Barbara Oakley about what is evidence-based in terms of learning and what might be distracting us from really gaining that capacity to gain expertise on a topic, as well as being able to think critically about the world around us. So with no further ado, let's keep talking youth work. Hello, everyone. Hello, Dr. Barbara Oakley. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much, Anita.
And hi, Rui.
Hello, Anita. Hello, Dr. Barbara.
Yeah, hi, Rui.
We were just sharing that me and Rui were a bit starstruck by having you on our podcast. we are both fans and learners from your course.
Well, I think the work you're doing kind of on the front lines of conveying important information about research that helps teachers and learners in general learn better is so important. So I am so lucky and grateful to be on your show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I would like to jump right in. You are a neuroscientist, a researcher, a professor, but you didn't start like that. Tell us a little bit about your story and how did you get interested in how the brain learns?
Well, there's an initial disclaimer. So I'm actually not a neuroscientist, although I play one on TV, so to speak. I'm a professor of engineering. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that my background is in electrical engineering. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what's going on in neuroscience right now really relates to the circuits and the systems that are in the brain. And so it's a lot easier to kind of wade into the incredibly complex issues of neuroscience if you have an electrical engineering background, then say if you had, just a sort of a background in a completely different area. And electrical engineering surprisingly overlaps with neuroscience. And more than that, what's going on in artificial intelligence nowadays is also bridging the subject matter of neuroscience. And it's a little easier to understand what's going on in AI from a neuroscientific perspective. So I just have this really lucky or unlucky confluence of backgrounds where I started out as a linguist. I learned a foreign language intensively. Then I retrained my brain starting I was at age 26 and began studying and to learn mathematics, which I never could even grapple with as a youngster. I started at remedial high school algebra. But so then I'm bringing in learning how to learn in math and science. Then I taught at an advanced level of undergraduate and graduate electrical engineering, thermodynamics, and so forth. And all these backgrounds, plus a lot of travel, means that I triangulate on how we learn from a very, very different perspective than most researchers who've gone through that pipeline of you go to college and you go to graduate school, then you become a professor, and you're a professor of a discipline, and particularly in neuroscience, it's so complex that you can spend your lifetime studying a tiny area of the brain. So how did I end up doing this kind of thing? It was just sort of the next step always seemed like, this looks unusual. It looks kind of scary. Can I really do it? It seems like the step I should take. And I would always be like total imposter syndrome. I can't do this and so forth. But I'd go ahead anyway. And the result is I've got this kind of background that just gives me a unique perspective on how we learn.
Absolutely. You've done incredible things in your life, from working in the South Pole, translating from Russian, I believe.
Yes.
You've done so many things. When I was hearing you talk, I was thinking how interesting it is that sometimes our unique contribution comes from the bridges we can make between different areas, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I didn't realize that, it wasn't like my entire life I was trying to understand how we learn. I was just trying to learn things. Then after a while, as I got older, I began to see patterns in how we learn. And that's when I began to step back and become much more interested in how we actually learn things. And to my surprise, I really found that some of the very common approaches to teaching used around the world actually can cripple students' abilities to learn. And so that has made me, much more desirous of really trying to pitch in and help people understand how we really learn and not be misled by approaches that they're so seductively obviously correct. And when I say obviously, I put little scare quotes in there, but they just seem so easy and nice and natural that the people are taken up by them time and time again. Teachers are taken up by them, and it's sad because you see it play out in the performance of countries on difficult fields like the study of mathematics, study of science, and learning to read. So anyway, it's I think there's room for innovation in education, and it's not in the direction that you might obviously think it should go.
One thing that while I was listening was we've been talking about the process of learning for so many years, but I feel that we traveled so little. We know so much, but we travel so little from the methods that even my grandparents, I learned from the same in the beginning as the same methods as my grandparents. So what's taking us so long in your experience?
Well, a problem is that the brain learns in certain ways, and how your grandparents learned, our brains have not changed since that time. And a lot of the methodologies that have been discredited nowadays by modern educators, in reality, are quite helpful for learning. Now, let's see, back in the 1900s, even earlier, researchers or people who were high up in education, they were very much like, there's too much rote memorization. There's all this, repetitive practice is horrible. It's really, turning kids into zombies and so forth. And there's some truth to that. But at the same time, when it's really easy to throw the baby out with the bathwater, to say that, oh, okay, well, then repetition shouldn't be used in learning. And actually, there's overwhelming evidence from neuroscience that we often need to repeat things in order to be able to grasp them and create those neural pathways. So, when you say we move so little, sometimes actually we have moved. And I've spent the last 10 years traveling all around the world. And one thing that shocked me is like I'm in a creativity conference in Saudi Arabia, and I see the Western educators coming up and speaking about how we can make education more creative and more viable and vibrant for young people. And I'm sitting there going, that presentation, I saw virtually exactly the same presentation 30 years ago, and it hasn't moved since then, because all of these ways they sound really good, but they actually don't move the needle. In fact, they move the needle backwards on helping students learn. Now, I want to emphasize that I think creativity is really important in education. But you can't get there by just landing at the top and telling people they got to be creative or using some techniques. Creativity grows out of knowing something really, really well, and then being able to see and put together new creative ideas with that foundation that is really well placed. Through the well-meaning efforts of educators, Western educators, with ideas like you can always look things up, we don't grow the underlying neural schemas, the schemas that allow us to have a solid foundation to grow from. It's like saying, I want you to learn a language, but don't practice and repeat it, because that could kill your creativity. Just use it creatively. It's like, well, you can't learn a language without the practice and repetition. And, it's really important. It's important for language. It's important for math. It's important for learning a musical instrument. You can't do jazz beautifully unless you really have that foundation, which has come from a lot of practice. So I think these are all important ideas in education now, particularly nowadays as we're moving into this era of AI.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's like you can't drive a racing car without knowing how to drive a normal car.
Exactly right, which is also why I don't drive racing cars.
Also not a driver here.
going on the flow of kind of maybe busting these myths or at least tackling these ideas that we have that sometimes don't really help us move forward. We are doing this season in the podcast about Generation Z and Generation Alpha specifically. And we are also researching on that with some practitioners in Europe. And we get sometimes a little bit of the, oh, kids these days kind of feedback that this generation can, this cannot. Is there any widely believed myths about the new generations today, about how they learn, that brain science just does not support?
I think one of the biggest myths is that we should have safe spaces, and what this does is, as soon as I hear, and this is a safe space, I go, my antenna go up, because it's like, oh no, it's not a safe space. Because a safe space means that no one, should feel any kind of emotional distress out of anything that someone in the group says. The problem with this, and there's good neuroscientific research that shows this, if people become afraid to say anything that is sort of different, a new idea, something, you can never predict how someone will emotionally react. Even to some of the most innocuous statements could be taken the wrong way. So people just sort of withdraw. And then kids don't get used to hearing someone with a different opinion. And it turns out that for critical thinking, one of the most important things you can do is hear conflicting opinions and kind of get used to the idea of talking to someone who has a differing idea than you, of hearing something that may make you uncomfortable initially. So there's, pretty good evidence that simply this idea of let's make everything safe for students actually creates the conditions for having students come out of a program and simply be unable to talk to someone who doesn't agree with what their approach is. And I think that's part of the problem we're seeing today. I did a massive open online course called Speak Freely, Think Critically on Coursera about precisely these kinds of challenges. And this is a course, we're always explaining to kids, how do you make a critical argument? How do you get somebody and convince them of what you're thinking? But we don't teach kids, how do you listen? How do you really hear out someone who has a different opinion than you without just using a straw man? Oh, you're just bad for whatever reason. So, and also the teaching of the scientific method in school systems around the world has substantially declined. And that means kids don't grow up learning how to confidently and judiciously, kind of set up two opposing arguments and think about them in a scientific and rigorous way. So I do point to the teachers themselves, I think, are absolutely fantastic. But the system that trains those teachers, that is extremely problematic and is creating teachers who truly believe their approaches are the best because they've been taught that. But research is showing that's not necessarily the best approach.
I was listening and I was thinking about in the sports context where I work with teenagers. It's also they create an image of the perfect solution for playing this sport or that sport, or that the perfect move. And it's the discomfort to feel that you don't know. It's a place where we've learned, or we stepped aside, because when we confront someone or we're talking to someone who has a different idea, we have to stay in the space of maybe what I know isn't enough, or maybe what I know isn't true, and it's uncomfortable. So have we gone back to always being comfortable with opposing ideas, or is not the case?
There's good evidence that that we've gone away from learning how to, or even being in scholastic environments that encourage students to interact and how to deal with opinions that are different than themselves, which a lot of times doesn't mean, out talking and outsmarting someone, but rather hearing someone else's opinion. This sharpens your own ability to think critically. It used to be that you were encouraged to not only present your own opinion, but also to understand the other person's argument so deeply, not in a straw man sort of way, but a truly realistic way, that you could explain their argument as well as or better than they could. And that has slipped away. So now it's just so easy for youngsters to be like, hey, I've got this idea. It's it's going to be really helpful for people. And they're not used to thinking critically about, hey, wait a minute, do we have enough money to do this? Who's got the resources to do this? There's practical implementation problems and so forth. And so I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. We just had previously 2 episodes ago, we had also an expert on psychological safety explaining very much what you're saying as well, which is psychological safety is not about being comfortable all the time. It's to feel safe in discomfort, right? It's feel that you can function even if it's challenging, even emotionally, it can be challenging, but I can still function within that. Yeah.
That I love that person. So yeah, couldn't agree more.
She's brilliant, by the way. Yes. So one of the things that we hear youth workers and educators, teachers as well, sharing a lot is this idea that young people nowadays have a different kind of attention. Attention is negotiated differently. There is a need for fast feedback, or there is shorter capacity, according to them, to pay attention, or there's more distractions. So all these digital tools and all this kind of social media around children and young people today, do you think it's affecting how they are able to learn?
Without question. I think that's why many schools, at least in the U.S., are kind of denying the possibility of using cell phones in the classroom. And the younger that students are, the less that these devices are allowed in classrooms. There's an excellent article in The Economist recently on how ed tech actually, if anything, it's moved education backwards over these past decades. And if you think about it, like if you're working for a big ed tech company, you want to promote, the use of ed tech. If you're a Google scholar, you have every incentive to say, hey, you can always look it up on Google. And there's beaucoup evidence that now this idea of you can always look it up means that we don't form the underlying neural schemas, the schemas that are essential for learning. One example is nursing students in Finland, for example. I've been questioned about this. So Finland has been vaunted as being wonderful in education. Actually, the Finnish Building Report came out and said that ever since that initial PISA report, where students were supposedly some of the best in the world, Finland has been going downhill. And there's good evidence that the reason that Finland was so high to start with was because they used traditional approaches to teaching much later than any of the other countries in Europe. And so that you had this bolus of students who had been trained using traditional approaches, then a last little tiny layer at the top of constructivist, approaches, student-centered approaches. And so then when they took the PISA, everybody said, oh, hey, this is why Finland is so good. They're using constructivist approaches, but it was wrong. It was because they were using traditional approaches much later. But to circle back, now see, my working memory is limited. Now, what was the central aim that we were going after again?
I was asking you, how are the new digital devices and the new digital environment of distractions for these generations influencing their learning? Is it hindering their capacity to learn?
Right. And it definitely is in so many ways. One of the ways is you need to have like neural downtime to be able to think creatively about things. And that means neural downtime means you're sort of standing in a line and you're bored and you're just your brain will start thinking about things. It's using that default mode network. And and if you're staring at your phone, you're not doing that. And so these new devices have really reduce the amount of time that we spend in daydreaming and mind wandering mode, because we can always be entertained by grabbing that cell phone. But the other thing is that educators and psychologists, well-meaning though they are, have long encouraged this idea of, you don't need to look up, or memorize the multiplication tables because you can always look it up. But getting back to that story in Finland, what they find is Finnish nurses, like if I say to you, 12 times 12 is 299, hopefully there's something inside you that says that's wrong. But think about it, if you have not memorized the multiplication tables, nothing says that's wrong. And in fact, you can type 10 times 10 into a calculator, get 1,000, or be off by a factor of 10, and you don't notice the difference because there's nothing internal that helps you predict that error. And so what they're finding is that the nursing students are really having nowadays terrible troubles with inability to do even simple calculations. And part of that is there's two different neural systems our brains use, and that's that automatic system that helps us recognize patterns. It only builds our understanding by lots of repetition. So you repeat that multiplication table until you know it by heart. Then you begin to get a sense of the numbers. And then there's the other system, which is our conscious understanding system. And what we've done is we've kind of thrown out training that under that deep underlying procedural automatic basal ganglia cerebellum system. It's that's not important. And it cripples students' abilities to learn because they can't draw on this automatic system. When you don't teach phonics first, you're not training that automatic system. And then it becomes really difficult for kids to learn to read because they can't draw on that automatic system. So many areas in education are really, I think, in crisis because they simply have not incorporated knowledge about how the brain really learns.
Mm-hmm. Many of our listeners work in settings outside of school, and they work a lot for this promoting critical thinking or soft skills, what we used to call soft skills. teaching kids communication, even resilience or kindness or other kinds of themes. Does it work the same way? What I'm asking is, how do our brain works for learning those things when it's not about memorizing, for example, a math table, but it is about learning behaviors that guide us, for example, through a dialogue with different opinions?
So we have to be really careful. This is a day and age where technology is quite important. And even though I think we have we have so much by way of translation now, with AI being able to help with automated translation, I think learning another language is not only a wonderful mental exercise, but it's also really helpful in allowing you to learn how to deal with others who think differently than you. And that's a big part of what social interactions are really all about. So I think it's important to remember that although you can teach some really insightful and useful ideas for social interactions, another aspect of what learning is becoming an expert at something. And an expert at something that's difficult to do. And this gives self-esteem in a way that, you can talk self-esteem a lot, but if you're really good at something, you naturally acquire a sense of self-esteem. And there is a lot of research that shows exactly that. So it's, in some sense, there's two types of knowledge. There's what is called biologically primary knowledge. That's what we're geared naturally to be able to learn. Like, we don't have to send little kids through graduate school to be able to recognize faces, even though recognizing faces is really difficult. And likewise, the brain. But there's other things that are called biologically secondary materials or subject matter, and that we are not geared towards learning. And this includes things like learning to read as opposed to learning to speak, and learning how to do mathematics and so forth. Now, a lot of the sort of communications and social skills, those fall into that biologically primary category. And in some sense, it's easier for people to pick up these skills, and particularly if you might teach them. But so I think it can be important to teach these kinds of ideas, but don't forget that it's really important to actually have a skill as well. And sometimes I think that those working in the social sciences, for example, they can talk about how wonderful empathy is, and we should be teaching about empathy. But they never mention that empathy is a double-edged sword, that by teaching children that they should be empathetic to others, they are opening the door for others to manipulate them. Mm-hmm. Empathy is we only teach about how it's really good, but actually in many ways it can be really bad. I mean, that's how you get codependency. That's how you get young women growing up thinking they should help others, and so they marry perhaps a drug addict, and they're trying to be helpful, and as a result, they have an extremely problematic relationship. So sometimes I think that the emphasis on social skills is not always as good as it's cracked up to be, because it's only looking at the bright side of things. And part of my research involves what I call pathological altruism. That means well-meaning ideas, they sound so good, that actually make things worse. And of course, that's also rife in education.
I was listening and I was thinking that it may be more helpful to learn more languages than teach empathy as a subject per se. Because when you're learning another language, you're learning another way of thinking, because language is part of the culture. If you're understanding the language, you're understanding the culture also. So it's quite interesting that maybe if we put people talking more languages, the empathy will come in the package, you know. That's what
I am nodding away. You're so right.
yeah. And interesting for an anecdotal part is that, for example, self-compassion for me, it's still in English. I'm Portuguese, but because I learned self-compassion through English and American speakers. So self-compassion for me comes in English, doesn't come in Portuguese. So it's interesting how it shapes also our inner worlds.
Absolutely.
That's really, I'm going to have to think about that. That's a really insightful comment.
I would add, when we don't have much more time, so I'm already feeling like, oh, I wanted to now have a tea and stay in the conversation. But I would also add to that I as a youth worker myself, and somebody who does a lot of training about empathy and a lot of training on on soft skills, let's say, or these important life skills, I agree that many times we romanticize these principles, and we almost indoctrinate people, on behaving a certain way. But and I believe that we should be empathic. However, I think teaching that also includes showing what an excess of that can do, what it can lead to. And this could be applied to empathy, but it could be applied to many other things, how you communicate, or or self-confidence, or, so many other things. It's a matter of, being maybe balanced, right? About, and not romanticizing these skills as this is what's going to save you in your life.
That's so true. And I think that could make such a difference for students if you have this more balanced approach.
Okay. Because we are almost getting to the end, I feel that I'm going to just ask one more question, and then we're going to go for the question from our previous guest, if that's okay. So my last question for you would be, what would be your suggestion for educators, especially those that maybe work outside of school? So not teachers only, but educators that work with young people in different contexts. What would be an advice that you would give them in order to support these new generations to thrive in this world full of distractions and the things they're growing with? What would be an advice that you would give them?
Learn how to learn.
Very good.
But try to do it, like a lot of advice about learning is not really based on how the brain actually learns. And so be wary of what approaches, you are hearing about. And also learn how to listen to people who have different opinions than you. Learn how to describe things in ways that they would agree that you are portraying their position fairly. I think learning to think critically, it's important to realize this. And we can't think critically about what we're getting from AI, though, if we don't have knowledge internalized within us. It's very important to really learn things well, so you can think critically about what AI is giving you, and get those engrams, those neural pathways laid within yourself. Don't always just look it up. Use flashcards to get great ideas within you, but talk to people who you really disagree with, and get used to hearing ideas that you disagree with and hear them out. Actually listen and see if you can, see why because there's lots of good people who will have very different ideas than you. And it helps to train your brain if you learn to listen as well as how to speak. Ooh.
Yeah, one quote came to mind from Sharon Salzberg. Compassion doesn't mean we don't fight. It means we don't hate. So we can disagree and not become a fight. So
exactly right. That's very well said. And our education systems can be promoting this kind of thing, and they used to, and they can bring it back.
Yeah, debating.
Really.
Rui, we have a question from our previous guests for Dr. Barbara. Do you want to read it out?
Yes. How are you working with the polarization right now in your field of work?
Oh, so political polarization, the way I'm working on it is through that massive open online course, Speak Freely, Think Critically. And it teaches you why sometimes you can talk to other people and you can just make it worse. And it teaches you how to learn about these, what's the difference between actually talking to someone with whom you can interact and how to talk with someone with whom about the best you can do is listen and understand their opinion. So, you really want to be able to learn to listen to people, because let's say that your daughter's boyfriend believes that Martians are going to be invading the world. You want to draw this guy out and hear and listen to what are his reasonings for this, because it's better that you know this kind of thing, and then you can talk to your daughter about it afterwards. But if it's better to know this than to just sort of say, I'm not a listener, so don't talk to me about your opinions on things.
I learned that as a parent, to shut up when the subject starts so I can listen more, because there's a temptation of the earth is flat, and you just the earth is not flat, and I've learned that the earth is flat. Oh, tell me more.
Really? That's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah.
I've learned a lot by keeping my mouth shut.
That's the best way to put that.
Dr. Barbara, what would be a question you would like to leave for our next guest, not knowing who he or she is?
Okay. So my question, and I really would like to know more about their answer, is what is the bad side of putting all our educational focus on creativity and curiosity and driving towards that?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I wouldn't like to be the person answering that.
It's a very nice, thought-provoking question.
Yeah. It's not a quick answer for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. And
thank you.
It's really
so much. We will definitely also share the link to your course on critical thinking. And thank you once again for your availability to be here with us. And we will follow your adventures wherever they might take you with enthusiasm as well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Oh, and I've got free links, so I have to send you those. To get in a certain way, so I'll type that.
Thank you.
This podcast was brought to you by Team Mais, recorded and edited by Rui Branco for the international project Inception of Learning, financed by the Erasmus Plus program. Our great partners for this project are the associations Fundacja Instytut Innowacji from Poland, Jasna Idnina from North Macedonia, and Odd Socks from Montenegro.